Welcome once again to another edition of Good Books. I'm your host this week, Dr. John Cook, and with me today are Michael and Barbara Foster. Michael wrote the foreword to the book we're going to talk about, and Professor Barbara Foster is a mature married associate professor at an urban university and the author of numerous articles in a highly regarded biography. A lecturer at universities, museums, and libraries worldwide, was recently interviewed in the Times Literary Supplement. Barbara and Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I'll bore them with a short story about this book because I had the book and I thought I didn't. I thought I had not received it because I was expecting something on open marriage, and what I got was this book called Confessions of a Librarian.
Yeah, hot reading.
A Memoir of Loves. And so I got an erotic novel, and it is autobiographical, though. Is that?
No, it's not a novel. It's a memoir.
Okay.
And a memoir in a tradition, that goes back to St. Augustine, if I may say that. Casanova, more likely, and Anais Nin, more exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And names are always changed in something like that because otherwise you get sued.
Right, the names are changed to protect the guilty, but
yes, exactly.
But there's a lot of accuracy in the details. Is that right?
Yes,
okay.
Very much so. Actually, the initial title of this was The Confessions Club, and it originated out of a club of a half dozen mature women who got together in Lower Manhattan in Gramercy Park neighborhood and talked about who they were underneath the face they had to put on to carry a job and a profession and that sort of thing. And now that women are out there with men having professions, they've got to have that kind of face. Mm-hmm. But underneath it all, they had all kinds of interesting stories to tell, and so they did. Now, Barbara recorded some of this in the book, in Confessions, but it's mainly her adventurous travels, erotic travels, to places I'm sorry to say that I don't think you could come back alive these days.
Right, yeah. And it's interesting, and I want to touch on some of those exotic places and some of the interesting stories, but I'd actually like to start with a thought, Barbara, at the end of the book. Confessions Club is an interesting group, and I'd love to talk about how real those characters are. But you talk about your confession stemmed from a deeper need to comprehend your behavior and questionable characters that have could have easily ended in the morgue. But you said that being in a wide open marriage put you in the equivocal position that required the steadiness of a tightrope walker. One misstep could shatter the delicate balance of egos. Emotional risk-taking provided security and excitement. Big relationship changes were never on your agenda. You only wanted to enhance your romantic life, picking roses from a bush full of thorns. You accumulated wounds that healed once a new lover kissed them away. That's just absolute prosaic, beautiful writing.
That sounds like Michael's writing. He really beautifies and corrects everything I do.
Well, Barbara and I have done two things. Mm-hmm. We've had a long-term marriage, an open marriage, but much more dangerous, as far as I'm concerned, is we co-wrote books.
Yes, that is dangerous. I know for sure.
And we did two very important biographies. And I wanted to do biographies of really, really heroic women. And so we did a couple of those. One is an explorer of Tibet. The other was the great Civil War sex symbol, actually, Ada Isaacs Mencken, a Texan, no less. Mm-hmm. And we did both of those and worked together on those. And I don't know who wrote what finally.
As a research librarian, I was given the task of taking notes and finding original sources. And Michael is the wonderful writer that he is, and being a historian gave him a special point of view as well. So that's basically how we worked. And with this book, this is my first real book that I lived, and I wrote a first draft, and it's my memoir, so that now, as a woman of d'une certain âge, I can read it and relive it, and it kind of shocks me that I lived through that, that anybody could live through that anymore. So it's a pleasure. It's a vacation that anybody can afford to a dangerous place, an exotic place, and having sex with beautiful men that you wouldn't ordinarily dare even to look at now.
And this is interesting in the various details of the romantic encounters that you had in a variety of romantic locations. But I see an element in several of them that's kind of bittersweet, kind of.
Yes, very much so. Yes, because we can't live our life out full when you're there on a sabbatical. I mean, it has to end. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when you put yourself into a situation where you're the rich American tourist traveler and they're the local person, it's inevitable that there's going to be a gap between you, mm-hmm. and it's going to be undeniable. Mm-hmm. And so that's that's part of the bittersweet, is imagining when you fall in love with someone for the first time and you imagine a life with them, and then reality hits you in the face because it's time to go back to your job and your home and New York. It's the end of a dream. Mm-hmm. So there's a bit of bittersweet in some of these stories. Did
you ever feel, as an empathic kind of reader, I sense that you were seduced and abandoned on occasion?
Yes, paid off with cheap jewelry or my traveler's checks stolen.
Well, how about kidnapped in the Ganges?
Yeah,
almost kidnapped anyway. Carried off by a very tall man with a turban while I was bathing in the Ganges to accumulate the blessings that are in the holy water there. I was sort of nabbed mm-hmm. and saved by a fellow librarian who I was visiting at the time. So, yes, when you fall in love with someone in India now or in the Middle East, you take your life in your own hands mm-hmm. and pray that you survive.
Yeah, I'm interested in the. Remember, we came of age somewhat in the 60s, 70s, and remember Make Love, Not War? Mm-hmm. We seem to have gone 180 degrees in the opposite direction.
No, America.
I do want to talk about that because I know that you live in a country where we're dominated by the mores of the Abrahamic religions of Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and especially in Orthodox Christianity and Islam, the idea of a woman being sexually liberated is mm-hmm. An offense.
It's a no-no, yeah.
And so,
but the change that's going on now in the definition and concept of marriage is unbelievable, and it's shocking to me in the speed. Not shocking morally, but in the speed, the whole gay marriage thing and the transgender thing. Who would have predicted this a few years ago? Well, the whole definition of marriage and the whole definition of the couple and relationships, it's just undergoing tremendous change here. Mm-hmm. And I don't know about the rest of the world. I haven't been traveling lately, but usually what starts here keeps on going.
Uh-huh. And I also think that there's a lot of interest in this notion, even though it's fairly rare. Part of what drew me to this book was the publicist's question of, is an open marriage the best way to maintain a long-term relationship? And we no longer think in terms of forsaking all others till death us do part, mm-hmm. and divorce is such a common thing. I'm wondering if you believe that this open marriage contributes to more success in your married relationship.
Oh, yes, of course. There has to be honesty. There has to be respect. That goes without saying. But with the tremendous amount of suffering that's going around in the world from war and natural disaster, if there's something that we can do to stay together and love each other and avoid divorce, this is a step in the right direction.
Always, historically, going all along, there always been, in a sense, an open marriage in that the man played around and had a girlfriend, mistress, prostitutes, whatever, and the wife stayed home, allegedly,
right.
although often she didn't.
Right.
So, it was just undercover, and now everybody seems to want to tell everything about what they've done and so forth. So it's being opened up, but whether it's really that dramatic a change from what went on, I don't know.
Is there ever anyone who discovers this open marriage relationship, who's taken aback, who says you're sinning and you're going to burn and that sort of thing?
Only in the very traditional religious media stations. We've had a few times. Once a woman said, Michael, you're taking this sweet woman on a path towards destruction and hell, and we had to giggle because, I mean, our choice of how we live is really was determined by both of us.
I should say also, we never had children. Now, that's partly because of our lifestyle, but not only the open marriage idea, but we chose early on lives of adventure and some risk.
And art. I mean, the art wars. You can't make money anymore.
And I was going to say, it really came down to the steadiness of income. And when it came to books and all, we've seen some big money a long time ago, and lately nothing whatever. So I tend to make my money in the market, and that's extremely risky and nonsensical to boot. So it would have been very hard to support kids, what they demand these days, a college education and so on.
Michael, you might remember from a quote from the first book, the Three in Love, the history of menage a trois. Someone said, and I don't remember who it was, it takes three to hold a marriage together.
That was, I believe, Hugo.
Oh, Victor Hugo.
Yeah.
Wow. That was quite a wonderful effort that we first made in writing about this kind of relationship, menage a trois. And we have been in one and have benefited from it for over 30 years. That's given a lot of stability to things. I've had a steady other relationship, and finally it melded into one relationship. Family. Yeah.
And I did we all three actually did a whole history of the menage a trois and the so-called love triangle, and it's called Three in Love.
And there's a website you can see and read about us and see us. Actually, it's called threelovestory.com.
And that's been a whole historical thing that goes way, way back. And again, lots of it undercover.
Because they were heads of state, they were artists, they were political people, and they were people who shaped world history. Yeah. And it was quite a fun book.
Speaking of heads of state, we're doing an amplified version of the book now. We're doing, I don't want to say a sequel because it's much bigger. And I've just been researching the Kennedys, and frankly, I was astounded. I knew he played around, but I didn't know it was 365 days a year.
Yes.
I didn't know that Jackie played around and had affairs with Bill Holden and Marlon Brando. And this is while Jack was alive. And the whole thing was wide open and kept quiet by the press.
Yeah, she protected the presidency. I mean, that's really quite a wife. And I can admire her for that, for keeping things not just in order, but in creating the whole mystique of killing.
Well, anyway, it seems that I would say Jack Kennedy's sexual life was completely chaotic and muddled, and yet he was a very calm and effective president. So I haven't figured that one out yet.
Yeah.
Well, I know that they talked about his bad back, but I didn't know the ultimate cause of it there, I guess.
It might have been the drugs that he took.
No, he also had a very serious disease, similar to leukemia, and he was always on the point of death, and that's what I think drove him. That's a very strange thing to live with.
Sexuality really fights against death.
Yeah.
When you come down to the energetics of it, when you think of the emotional appeal of it, it's not just merging with someone, it's staying alive and fighting against the angel of death.
I don't want to miss the flavor of this memoir. It's delicious in some places, and
good.
You've got some really passionate moments.
Well, what did you like? Which part?
I was fascinated by your Argentine tango partner.
Oh yes, he was he was a very beautiful person.
Well, she is a great fan of Borges, the Argentine writer, and some of that rubbed off.
Yeah, and that was a story that ended with a question mark. We lost track of each other, and that's very mellow but bittersweet kind of ending. And you wonder, did he die? And I went and looked for him in Argentina and found his face in other people.
Yeah.
I had no hesitation in writing the foreword. I think it's a record where the husband writes a foreword to his wife's erotic adventures.
Right, that
He's
may
been
be
involved in everything that
but,
I do.
But it's because it was very interesting, and I got a real kick out of her affair with a mob figure in downtown Manhattan.
Oh, yes, that.
And his offer to rub me out. Now, as it happens, my old man worked for Murder Incorporated, and I grew up with a lot of gangsters, and I had friends, so it bothered me. I thought of reciprocating.
Well, now, you were also occasionally in a situation where, Barbara, where it wasn't all that wonderful at the moment. You were either spurred by fear, for instance, when you were lured into the tantric ritual.
Yeah, well, it's very different when you write about it and when you try to experience it. I find that I have to do a double take when I look back at this book and think, gee, did I really do that? Writing about it, being a librarian, reading about it is very different from living it. And when it comes face to face with, do you really want to deeply involve yourself with a group of people at that moment, at that place? Sometimes you run away and you write about it because we are authors more than anything. So, yes, I'm glad you enjoyed that, though, because India is so spectacular and wonderful and colorful, and it's life-changing.
And dangerous.
And life-changing. When you go there, you're never quite the same because you've been touched by the ancient spirits and the ancient souls. And it plays in the art, it plays in the music, in the food, in every aspect. It comes to you through the air, through the senses. All the senses are awakened in India.
And while we're talking about ancient civilizations, let's take you to your visit in Israel. Again, a lover that was intensely attractive to you disappeared.
Yes, well, he was funny and he was fun to make love with because he wore different hats. He'd go to the closet and he'd put on a different hat for different occasions, and he was sort of a comedian. But what's interesting is that he introduced me to Isaac Singer and to brought me closer to my own heritage. It was the lovemaking, the peacemaking of the Arab and the Jew, and it's impossible on a big scale. But on a small scale, on person to person, it's more than possible.
Yeah, and it was also interesting to me that she got to go across the Sinai to the mountain where supposedly Moses got the Ten Commandments, and I would have loved to have taken that trip. You better not do it now. The Sinai's a battleground.
Right.
But there's a lot of places I would have liked to have gone, and I don't think I'm going to get. And that's a little bit depressing. But it's nice to be able to at least read about it and do it in an armchair way.
I wrote the book, my memoir, to encourage younger women to free themselves emotionally and sexually. And looking around, I don't think I really needed to do that. What I needed to do is to encourage people to reach beyond their own culture and to travel and to make connections with people who are outside of their neighborhood and their school and their sorority and taste life.
One of the things that I found interesting is that you don't keep Michael in the foreground for these stories because, of course, this is about those other loves. And it seems that from time to time when you had an intense romantic relationship or something that really stimulated you either emotionally or intellectually or culturally that was fascinating to you, and then that was over, the way you would get over it was with a new relationship.
Yes. Actually, I wanted to end the book that way as well. I'm waiting for the phone to ring again, and Michael said, wait a minute, bring something of more depth here. Bring something that has more resolution to this book and to your life. And so we changed the ending of the book.
Yeah, you talk about is open marriage feasible? Well, obviously, if you have a closed life in general, and a very tight professional schedule and so on, and kids and big financial responsibilities, I wouldn't advise it. Is what I'm saying. So we chose a certain type of life. I was getting to something which I think I've forgotten.
Let me add something here, because I do look through this as almost Barbara being single because of the different loves. But
I lived a double life. You know, at night in New York, I would cruise the bars, and I would pick up people and be picked up by people who were attractive to me. And by day, I was this librarian in the college library. And even though I was doing sort of dull clerical work in the library, during the day I wrote erotic poetry. So I always had this fake front, this facade of the bookish person, where underneath I was the body person. So I'm bookish and body, and that comes through in the book, I think, in the Confessions of a Librarian.
So one of my questions that came up for me as I was reading this is: doesn't one have to be particularly attractive to be so successful at this?
You better start out that way. Yeah.
No, not necessarily. People are always looking for adventure and for love, and you'd be surprised who's out there. I mean, sometimes I'm still involved in dating websites, and some unusual people show up sometimes.
Yeah, but you know, the definition of attractive and all, what I find kind of depressing is how little attention people pay to how they look these days. And this is true in here we are in a fancy Chelsea, Manhattan, the hottest neighborhood perhaps, mostly young people, and they don't go to any effort at all, you know.
It's not Los Angeles, no.
No, well, I don't know what happens in Los Angeles
Austin,
these days.
Houston, I mean, you're going to find really classy-looking women there. But here, everybody dresses to sort of disappear, a lot of them, and they march off to work. And it's such a different generation for us.
You can do a lot with whatever looks you have if you're interested.
Okay. One of the lines in this, I kept thinking, she seems so single, she hardly mentions Michael, but at some point when you're about to leave the old city after you lost your Egyptian paramour, you said, I couldn't wait to see my husband again. A passing dalliance, no matter how absorbing, could not compare to a relationship that had sustained me for so many years. And that sort of mitigates against the description for those of us who follow traditional marital paths. That seems such a strange out of place.
It's an interesting parallel with the biography we did of Alexandra David Neal. The first one is called Forbidden Journey, and she allowed herself, and her husband allowed her to travel on her own through Asia for 14 years, and he financed her. She couldn't have done that without the anchor of the support of that husband, emotional as well as financial. They wrote letters back and forth. And I think if you are going to reach for the heights, you also have to be very well grounded in the earth.
You mentioned earlier the online connections, and there was an awful lot of disappointment in those in the early going, wasn't there?
Yeah, a lot of people are. You know, people sometimes have this preconceived notion of what they want. It's sort of like a shopping list, you know. And when they find that people don't measure up or don't please them in certain ways, they want to give up. Well, you can't really do that if you want to keep on growing. So there's a lot of pleasure out there, a lot of adventure out there, and it's for us to find it.
Yeah, but you mentioned,
about our relationship, Barbara has always been a great dater. And she started at 14 at Dick Clark's American Bandstand in Philadelphia, and has always been doing that. I was never interested in that. I've always had the really traditional setup of a wife and a mistress. And if you don't think it's traditional, read our Three in Love, which starts out with the Bible and goes up through the celebrity age.
Abraham and Sarah.
Well, let's not get into that, but it goes right through the whole list, and it's almost every important writer and so forth, and artist and a politician and on, and they've almost always had this kind of setup, and I find it very suitable to me because I don't like to run around. I don't even like to meet new people, and so we've had a threesome.
Michael is a great writer. He stays home and writes.
Yeah,
Lisa,
we've had this threesome for a long time now.
Lisa, our third person, is really the sort of the glue that helps us hold things together.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
She's a health practitioner. She's a writer on her own. She's writing a book on heart health right now. You'll see that when you go to threelovestory.com, our website. And I've always been the gadabout. I'm the social one that one goes out to, finds the literary agent or finds the connections that we need for promotion. And Michael does the writing of the books, and Lisa does the fine work, the editing, the copy editing, the polish, some of the social networking. So you have to have a team if you're going to be an artist these days. You can't do it like in the Renaissance when you have a patron. There aren't any out there. And your books, eventually you're sold for a penny at Amazon.com. So there's no living. There's no surviving with it. You have to make it a labor of love. It has to be beyond the ego, the single ego, and it has to be a team effort to survive.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to mention that you do have some cautions for folks about online folks who don't always represent themselves accurately, and they ought to read that as well. But I want to make sure that we touch on the Confession Club just a little bit, because there were quite a few interesting characters in there, and you played them with a sensitivity that also allowed them their quirkiness, which I find amusing in some cases.
Well, they were fun. Yeah, they were fun characters.
Well, it started about the same time as 9/11, and here they were in Manhattan, and it sort of just blew apart, the facade, and they got together and once a week and said, let's tell the truth.
One of my favorite stories was Petrulio. I mean, I was really attracted by this very chic-looking, Italian-looking man, sort of like an Yves Montand sort of character, and he took me up to his lavishly decorated apartment, and then it ended up that he was a hairdresser, and he sort of redid my hair and my look, and I was thinking about, I'm interested in living with this person and being with this person, but what he gave me was much more valuable. It was a new image of myself. So it was a funny story.
Yes, and after what appeared to be rapturous experiences out in the world, he took you home and put on his other garb too.
Yeah.
Well, that's becoming very much in the news.
Well, it's an interesting read. Like I say, it read like an erotic novel, and vivid images of a lot of people. Wonderful excerpts from your poetry. I'm fascinated by the mad socialist character who seems to be the glue that holds the group together and drives them apart at the same time.
Yes, I know her well too.
I call her the monster.
Yes.
She goes back to my childhood in Philadelphia, and she's always needled me. She's always pushed me, and she has no idea that she's in this book. So I don't want to talk about her too much.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things about changing the names.
No, you have to.
But folks would recognize themselves, I'm sure.
I hope not.
As long as nobody else does.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with the two of you about this wonderful book, Confessions of a Librarian, a Memoir of Loves, exploring what it's like to live the life of an open marriage. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook. I remind you, if you don't hear our broadcast when it's on 4 times a week on 88 FM, you can also catch us on YouTube on our channel, Good Books Radio, Strong and Cook, and you can pick up some of our shows there if you miss them on the air live. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook. Thanks for listening.